Fish are friends, not food.
I'm a little worried about Rob.
Yes, it's happening.
Ever since we tried to summon Cthulhu, he hasn't been the same.
I'm growing gills. Gills. My transformation into a deep one has finally begun.
Rob, we don't see any gills.
It's these kids getting involved in all this stuff causes them to go crazy.
I think I feel the webbing starting to grow between my fingers.
Welcome to Dinner and a Board Game, a new actual play show about friends, good food, and lots of fun at the gaming table. We're your hosts, Megan and Heath. Each night, I'll invite the gaming group over to my house to cook dinner, sample drinks, and play a board game on one of our customized board game boards. Dinner and a Board Game is an actual play show where you'll be able to watch the game from start to finish with gameplay dashboards and graphics that help track the turns and allow everyone to follow the game's action. We'll play games like Zombicide, Black Plague, Descent, Journeys in the Dark, Small World, Unearth, and Terraforming Mars. We'll even be joined by special guests such as Lou Anders, J.F. Lewis, and cosmic horror artist David LaRocca. The show is free to watch on YouTube. Just come by my channel, Heath Robinson, and be sure to subscribe. Click Watch Now to start the first episode and join us for fun-filled evenings of dinner and a board game. And now it's time for General Geekdom, the roundtable show about movies, games, books, and other things going on in the fantasy and sci-fi genres, as well as all the geekverse. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Table Talk. I forget that intro actually says General Geekdom. I've got to make a custom Table Talk intro for us, but I've been trying to not just stress out over the past 24 hours. So we just have that intro. So work on that later. So tonight we have a very special guest with us for Table Talk who is basically here because of her popularity and request on the entire, on the channel. This is Brianna da Silva. She was the producer, director.
The producer.
Yeah, she was the director and co-writer of The Cultists, and she has been very popular on this channel to talk about we've talked about story analysis kinds of stuff before, and people have asked to have you back. And so here you are.
Here I am.
So we've got lots of people here. I see we got Stray here. Stray is here with us. Toadstool Hollow. Good evening, Toadstool Hollow. Good to see you. BGD is here. And Lord Alathorn. Welcome, Lord Alathorn. There we go. Welcome.
I love all these names. So many of them are so obviously geeky. It's just oh, our people are here.
Yes, it absolutely is. Daz Linkett right here. Mike is here. Mike is one of the channel members. So we have the channel
awesome.
memberships going. So if you'd like to join, can love to have you that. Hey, Robert is here as well. And Tommy Kratt. Wonderful. Okay, so we are going to talk about the hero's journey and story analysis and the hero's journey in the context of fantasy storytelling tonight. Oh, 7x7. Is here. Wonderful. Good to see you. Stray says, hello, Heath. Greetings, Brianna. And Vision as well, one of our moderators. So we're going to be talking about the hero's journey in the context of storytelling and our analysis, but I want to cover one thing really quick first, because we have more controversy in the geekverse that has to do with Wizards of the Coast, and all of that stuff is going around. And so I posted a video on that subject this afternoon, and I posted to Twitter. I have thoughts on it, but I want to try. I've got this thing called the 48-hour rule, and I want to make this something that is an important part, or I'd like for this to be an important part of the general internet philosophy, right? So I said this with regard, because I went and watched his entire interview. And so I put this out also on Twitter. I said that, his statement about guys like me can't leave soon enough for this hobby. So I watched the entire interview, and I understand why people are upset, but I also adhere to the 48-hour rule. And this is the 48-hour rule is part of the Ravenkeep Discord code of conduct, rules and conduct. And I'll put the link to the Ravenkeep Discord in the chat if you would like to join us. But the 48-hour rules, this is one of the rules that we use to run our community on Ravenkeep. and I'd like to make it a broader part of internet culture. The 48-hour rule says that if someone says or does something that could be interpreted in a potentially negative, hateful, or harmful way, we will give them 48 hours to provide additional clarification. Sometimes things just come off differently than intended. So I think this is a great rule to operate by as far as online internet interactions goes, because sometimes, especially when we're speaking off the cuff, when you're live, when something is going on, you say something that can be interpreted in a different way than you intended, whatever. So I think that giving people a 48-hour window for clarification is a good idea. So I want to extend that to Kyle as well, if he would like to clarify his statements on that subject. And if he would like to, he doesn't have to come here. He can clarify that anywhere. But if he would like to, I would be very happy to have him on the channel for a table talk interview, where he can, if he needs a forum for that, I have questions for him on the OGL controversy as a whole, because I got notes on that as well, and also on the statement. But he's welcome to have as much time without interruption as necessary to clarify his statement, because a lot of people are upset about it. And if he needs a place to do that, he's welcome to do that here. And I would be very happy to host him. So we're going to go by the 24-hour rule and see what happens there. And, you know, I'm trying to, I think this is a good rule because I would like to have it for myself. You know, everyone, this is how are we dealing with people online? It's entirely possible that one day I will say something in one of these live streams that is interpreted, you know, is misspeak or interpreted in some way. And I would appreciate it if there were an opportunity to provide clarification. I think most people would also like to have that before, you know, we go off the deep end. So, you know, that was
because you can misunderstand, like you may say something and it's doesn't sound the way you meant it to be. So even when you're like, there's no possible way they could mean anything, but I think it's fair, just give them the chance. Because sometimes when there's sometimes misunderstandings happen when you say things, and it's just like, oh, that came out stupidly, you know? So,
yeah. So that's my position on it. Now, once 48 hours passes, I'm checking out to see, you know, if he's on other things or if there's tweets that Dungeons and Dragons puts out or Wizards of the Coast. I do have some thoughts on that subject, but I want to be sure that at least 48 hours has passed before we get into it. All right. Trying to stop the internet is just immediate responses and stuff like that. So we will see.
Yeah. The internet makes you feel like everything's urgent. And I think it's really unhealthy to operate on a personal level at the pace that the internet operates. The internet consists of billions of people. So just, we all should slow down a little bit.
We will see. So he's got the window. No. All right. Let's talk about the hero's journey specifically the hero's journey in general, but I suppose specifically as we're talking about fantasy storytelling. I've told people on this channel before that Brianna and I get together once a week for at least an hour discussion of story and story analysis. And we talk about the stories that we're writing, so we have someone else to bounce stuff off of. And so we decided we've been studying the hero's journey quite a bit. And so we decided, hey, let's just have a public discussion because people specifically requested you. So Brandon, do you want to get this started? I know you had taken some notes. I got notes. We watched Romancing the Stone yesterday because that one often comes up in books. We can talk about it, but we can talk about much more as well. But we watched that one specifically yesterday because in a lot of books on story structure, the Romancing the Stone is one of the ones that's used as examples quite a bit. So that's why we were watching it. But do you want to start us off, Brianna?
Yeah, I actually want to kind of like, before we even talk about the hero's journey, just kind of lay some groundwork and kind of establish the conversation and like why it matters. So the thing is, I think there are two different people that I want to speak to. One would be people that are kind of resistant to using story structure, which was me literally like a year ago. So I understand that kind of a person pretty well. And then there's also the kind of person who maybe overthinks about story structure and they get just completely stuck in it. And so I want to like kind of talk about to what extent it is important. For the first thing is that if you're a storyteller and you're trying to use story structures, especially like, say the 3-act structure, or I'm a fan of Michael Hages. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Michael Hages. I don't know. But he has like a 6-part kind of a version of the 3 act structure. There's a bunch of things. There's like this, the Save the Cat story beats. If you're using one of these and you find that it is restricting you or it's like getting in the way of your creative process, I would say you're probably using it wrong. And I think that's why that kind of resistance happens, is because it's like it's getting in the way of my creative process. All of these things are tools and they're there to make your story better. So if it's not making your story better or it's getting in the way, I would step back a little bit and try to understand the principles more, which is what Heath and I have done. And that's why I think it's really important to talk about the hero's journey, because unlike a lot of these other story structures where you're talking about, 25% of the story XYZ happens and like this like really precise stuff that's like, this hero's journey is extremely intuitive. And it comes from, the mostly influential person to talk about this was Joseph Campbell, which I'm reading his book right now. And he was talking about it as like a monomyth, as this idea that like when people write stories, they tend to have these really, the monomyth, that there tends to be these really broad general themes. And when you understand the hero's journey, what you'll find is that what you'll find, I'm just going to ignore that, is that you probably already are writing with a structure and you just don't realize it, that like it is like it's just kind of like natural to the human psyche that we tend to write something vaguely like the hero's journey. But studying it can help you like get better. It can help you when you're stuck. It can help you like when you're writing a story and you're like, I don't know what happens at this part of a story. When you know the hero's journey, that's one of the ways to be like, oh, this is what should happen here. And once you understand the hero's journey, it's easier to then go and learn the other structures. At least I found so, because then they will tell you, okay, at what point, if you're writing, say, a screenplay, is it normal in the industry to have this happen, kind of a thing. But all that to say, it's really flexible. It's not like a law. There are a lot of different versions of it and permutations of it. And like you have Joseph Campbell's version. There's the one. What's the author? The writer's journey. What's his name?
This is Christopher Vogler.
Christopher Vogler. Okay, so he simplified it a little bit. So he took Joseph Campbell basically does the study of all sorts of different world mythologies, and kind of found their similarities. And then that guy, I already forgot his name, Vogler, he figured out, he kind of took those principles and condensed them and made them easier for storytellers to use. There's another version that's even simpler called the story circle. It's basically the same thing, but it's helpful for like a shorter story structure, say for like a 1-hour episode of a TV series or something like that. So anyway, so that's a lot of things just to like, if anyone out there is resistant, to hopefully ease some of that resistance. But then I also want to say the other thing, which is that if you get too caught up just in structure and that's all you think about, you have to recognize that, again, structure is just a tool and it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that you're holding people's attention and that you move them emotionally, right? That's why we come to stories. So just remember that is a tool to help you get there, to help you have a better story that people connect with, but it's not the only tool. So all that to say, let's talk about the hero's journey.
Okay. Well, I guess my two things would be to say that, well, first of all, there's a difference to me between a story structure and a story formula. Some stories will be formulaic. And when I think about something that's formulaic, I think about like a TV show that, hey, every episode, like it's particularly an episodic TV show, you're like the formula for this TV show is that these things all happen in this TV show, and it can be extremely successful, like Home Improvement.
Okay.
I'm thinking of, I don't know, Brianna, you might not even know Home Improvement.
No, but I'm thinking of a show I've been watching called Lucifer, which is like that every single episode, he always goes to talk to his therapist. Every single episode, they're always solving crime. Like it's the same thing, but it's part
That's
of
a formula.
Yeah, it's a formula.
That is, so to me, that's different from structure. I mean, they're related, I guess, but there's formula. We're not necessarily talking about a formulaic story when we're talking about a structured story.
Yes.
And then the reason really that I got into this in a serious way is because, I've been writing stories and I've been trying to get them out and talk to people about them. And of course, some of my stories got rejected based on what I had written. And so I'm behind on all of that, but I'm plowing forward. And I was specifically told, though,
You're not behind. You're where you are. You're
I'm
you
where
are.
I am. I'm behind where I thought I would be, but I'm where I am, and
Hmm.
I'm very happy with the material that is now in development, even though it's behind where I thought I would be at this point. But
Hmm.
the situation with the hero's journey, I was specifically told that if you want to have a commercially successful story, you're an unknown writer at this point, trying to get
Yeah.
something off the ground. I needed to be told what is it that I needed to produce, and I was specifically told, write a hero's journey story. Don't try to write something
Yeah.
experimental, or don't try to write, I wasn't perceiving my stuff as experimental, but don't try to write something experimental. Don't try to write something very different. There'll be time for that later. First,
Yeah.
prove that you can write a hero's journey story. Boom, 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 boom. And prove you can do that. Then go on to other things.
I'm so glad you said that, because that was something else that I actually wanted to bring up and I forgot. It's just that that is what is expected in the industry, is that you have the ability to write a hero's journey. And so if you're like Heath or like me and you're like trying to break in, like that's the level one. You definitely got to do that. So yeah.
Mark Hyde is for the Joseph Campbell's story. Just plain awesome as a writer's resource indeed. Heck, any type of storyteller. And I've come to distinguish between books on writing and books on story structure, because the books just on
Yeah.
writing, like we were just talking about the words, and I haven't ever found those particularly useful. But some of these books on actual story structure like this are extremely valuable, I have found. James says stories are how humans relate to one another and share experiences on culture.
Yes.
Well, Trick says that even blockbuster movies are commonly formulaic down to the minutes spent in each part, or structured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see, because I guess it's kind of a fine line between the two. But to me, I wouldn't, just because it's like hitting certain beats at a certain moment doesn't necessarily mean it's formulaic. It seems to me that like when people say formulaic, it's kind of it's in the sense that you know what's going to happen literally, like every time, like a formulaic slasher film, for example. I don't know, like I don't know, I haven't watched slasher films, so maybe that's not a good example for me to talk about. But it's something where it's
You're talking about now
very,
he's going to go talk to the therapist, or
right,
now
like
he's going
that,
to talk to that. That's
But
going to happen.
with structure, you may feel, okay, things are about to get intense right now, because at this point that you're familiar with the stories that you watch in films, and that there's certain kinds of things that are going to happen, but you still don't know what exactly is going to happen. Like the stakes are increasing, but you don't know, okay, how are they going to solve the problem? So that's how you can be structured without being formulaic, is that you're still surprising people, because there's an infinite number of ways to tell a story, an infinite number of stories that can conceivably be told. So it's never going to limit you. It's just going to help you, as long as you're using it right. Yeah.
Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. That show is also a quintessential formulaic show. I mean, that show was the
Take your
exact
word for
same
it.
show every single episode.
Yeah.
All right. So where do we go from here, Brianna?
Well, I guess we can do our case study on Romancing the Stone.
Okay.
I figure we can just kind of go through the different steps. I have the shorter version, which is the one in the book that you're reading, that I did just because I didn't feel like doing the other one. But
do we need to actually go through the steps or stages, or do you think we can just talk about that in general as we go? I don't know if we need to actually outline all the stages.
well, we could just whatever feels natural. I figure we can just kind of like go through the
Well,
story.
I tell you what,
And
why don't you
talk
lead
about
off with our Romancing the Stone?
Sure.
Okay. So what were your thoughts on that?
So there were a few things that were interesting about it. One of the things that you mentioned, for example, is while we were watching it, was the fact that you have a willing hero. So a lot of people kind of misunderstand the idea of there's a point in the hero's journey where they talk about there's the refusal of the call, and the most cliche version of this is someone's like, you have to go and save the world, and the person's like, I can't, I'm just an ordinary farm boy, I can't do that, and they resist, and then something happens and they finally decide to go. And it doesn't always have to be that way. There can be resistance in different forms. And one of the examples, this movie has the character herself. She actually is pretty much right away willing. There's a slight bit of resistance, but she's pretty much right away willing to go, because that makes sense in that story. She's trying to go and save her sister. So she has the courage. But instead, there's another character that embodies that. There's another character, her publisher, that's like, you can't go to Columbia. And he's like trying to dissuade her. And so another interesting thing, I want to compare this to another film that has a willing hero, would be why am I suddenly blanking? The Katniss Everdeen movie. What is that? Hunger Games. Hunger Games. And that one, it's a similar thing. It's also to save a sister, actually, which is funny. She's instantly like, I volunteer as tribute. And there's no like singular person that embodies the refusal, but there's, overall the society, you see that nobody wants to be chosen. Nobody wants that. And so there's still that sense of there's some sort of resistance. And yeah, so anyway, just that's one of the things that's interesting about it.
Yeah, so that's being that, the Romancing the Stone has this willing hero. In fact, it's used as an example of a situation of the willing hero. And this was a situation that I was used, or that was called up to me because in one of the first drafts of the stuff that I had written, because I had a situation where I was going to have a willing hero as well. The situation presents itself, and then the hero is willing to answer that call. And the evaluation of the story was that it was not working because of the psychological part of this, that, that you're being called to great danger. You're going to go and do this extremely dangerous thing. And what is somebody's natural reaction to extreme danger or, disruption to your everyday life? It's, oh my God, no, don't do that. That's the natural reaction. And so that's why we have this refusal of the call to put in there, and why that's a natural part of the hero's journey. But that you can have situations where the hero is willing. And this is a more advanced technique in writing and the story structure that's exhibited by the Romancing the Stone. And then also another example is Dances with Wolves. Dances with Wolves. He goes out and he is a willing hero. So, but what do you do then? And this is why I was also told, go back and tell this other story later that I was writing. If you got this willing hero, it's an advanced storytelling technique to deal with a willing hero. And there, you can have it. It can work. It's working here. It's working in Dances with Wolves. But in order to do that, you have to embody the refusal of the call in another character. You still have to have that spiritual element to the story that people, I like this dynamic storytelling. Maxwell Alexander Drake, who has been on the channel before as well, he wrote this book called Dynamic Story Creation, which I think is an excellent book on the subject as well. And he talks about spiritual elements of story that the reader needs to ingest. And so I like that kind of language, that the reader or the viewer needs to ingest this idea of the refusal of the call. And so in Romancing the Stone still has it, but embodies it in the publisher, like you were talking about. The guy who's driving the supply wagon in Dances with Wolves embodies the refusal of the call. So it's not that, so it's an advanced technique because you're moving the refusal outside of the hero. You still have to make sure that the person is spiritually ingesting that part of the story, even though you're going to have, even though it's not going to be within the hero itself.
There was go ahead and redo those comments.
I was just going to say that ever read Story by Robert McKee, best book on the subject? I have not.
High on my list. That is high on my list. I hear it all the time. I will get to that one very soon.
Okay.
But yeah, I hear that that's one of the best ones. I'm also a fan of this book, and I'm gonna actually mention a couple things from this
Which one is
at
that?
some point too. This is John Truby. So he is. I love reading different. John Truby's The Anatomy of Story. I love reading from different thinkers of story because, for example, he is very I wouldn't say he's not structured, but he kind of is. Like he's very, like he almost rejects Joseph Campbell entirely. But he has a lot of wisdom to give too. And so I tend to think they're both right, but depending on the story. But there's some, I'm going to come back to that, even though it's not about the hero's journey. I'll save that for the end of the conversation, but
okay.
Yeah.
VGD says, resist the call to adventure at your own peril. Claim to be an ordinary farm boy, and next thing you know, your aunt and uncle are smoldering piles in the sandlot out front.
Yeah.
No,
This is
I
true.
tried making, in my personal life, answering the call to adventure, I put this out, is getting up in the morning and working on stuff you want to work at. Now, Marcos, welcome, says, now that I think of it, can we ever go past the hero's journey? I mean, I admit Campbell's theory doesn't apply to every story. I mean, I'd go with Kurt Vonnegut's story shapes.
Ooh, I
Let's
don't
talk
know
about
Kurt
that at the
Vonnegut.
very end. Let's talk about something like that at the very end. Like,
Yeah,
whether or not,
which is perfect because I wanted to bring up just John Truby at the end too, because he fits into that. What does it mean to go beyond that?
Okay.
Which is weird because I read him before reading Joseph Campbell. I feel like that should have been the other way around, but well.
Hey, Retro Nerd Girl.
Hello.
Okay, so then next up.
Oh wait, so I wanted to make another comment about this. So this is I'm not that far into Joseph Campbell's book, but I have read the part about the call to adventure, and I thought something that was really intriguing because he's not talking about it as a storyteller. He's mainly talking about it like kind of as a psychoanalyst, very Jungian. Like he's trying to get into the whys behind the myths, and what he was talking about, why there's the refusal of the call, is that. It's interesting, and I don't know if this is true or not. Sometimes I'm skeptical reading this kind of stuff. I'm like, are you overthinking this? I don't know. But he's talking about how sometimes the herald in myth, the herald is the one that calls you on the call. It's the one that gives the call to adventure. Sometimes the herald is like a monster or something ugly or something undesirable, and he was saying that it can represent something that's suppressed in the psyche. If you're thinking about a myth as being representative of like a personal journey that you're going on, it's this external adventure, but it could be representative of like a personal journey of change that every human being goes through in different parts of our lives. That is why we may resist the call to adventure, not just because it's scary, but because it's something we don't want to deal with. It's something that we just automatically want to shut down. And that could be symbolically why that happens. So I was like, that's interesting to think about. Just want to throw that out there. But yeah.
Okay. Well, what's next on your notes about that?
All right, what is next? Oh, so here's an interesting thing. So there's this idea of meeting the mentor, getting supernatural aid. I could not figure out if that's in this story. What did you think, or did I miss it?
In
Romancing the
Romance and
Stone. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that part of what she needs to learn is embodied by the guy, Jack.
That would have been my first guess.
Yeah, I think that she is the one, because it's not, when we say that this one is used for a lot of different examples, I can think of a couple of different things that it doesn't exactly have, which is fine, which is
it's flexible, as I was saying.
But I would say that what she was learning, she had to learn from Jack, because Jack is the self, she was very much about, I'm looking for the guy, the romance, but also, she even had as herself in her romance story, the agent of heroin. But when she actually gets into Colombia, the other world, it also had the very clear distinction about the other world. You fly
I had a note on that too.
In Colombia, you've got a very clear distinction of the other world in this. She's not that. She's helpless. So she has to learn how to be the type of heroine, and who teaches her that? I think it's Jack.
You probably are right. That would have been my first guess. At first, I was resistant because I was like, he doesn't fit into, because he fulfills multiple roles. And I think that's why I wasn't sure at first. But I think you're right, because you can absolutely have a character that fulfills multiple roles. So that I think you're right. I was saying the crossing of the threshold is she's like a fish out of water, which is always a really nice dynamic. The more you can accentuate the contrast between those two worlds and make the character uncomfortable in the new world, it just makes it more interesting.
I think we can come up with a list of stories where the entrance into the other world is a plane flight, because it seems like a lot of those stories that make that distinction. This one certainly does. You take a plane, and when you get off the plane, you're in the other world. She was in Colombia.
And it was comedic too. It was like a most ridiculous conception of it was like she's walking off the airport and literally there's crime happening, like police running past. It's just like, that's Colombia, apparently. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. But another movie that I can think of that I love is 21, which is
I don't know
about
that
the
one.
MIT card counters. I think we watched that one
Oh
together.
no, we watched that one together. I
Yeah.
always forget the title of that movie.
Yeah,
21. That's the
that one
one.
uses an airplane and has a sharp distinction between the regular
Mhm.
world, which is being at college at MIT. You take an airplane, you get off the airplane, you're in Las Vegas, you're in the other world. The other one, it's interesting, it's Las Vegas again, because I want to watch this one with you, because I don't think you've seen this one, but Honeymoon in Vegas, I want to watch Honeymoon in Vegas with you. That one
Hmm.
also, everyday life, and might have been New York. You take an airplane, you get off the airplane in Las Vegas, and you're in the other world. So it
Yeah.
seems like the idea of an airplane as a very clear distinction between an act one and act two separation in today's world, and then you get off the airplane, and boy, you are in a new situation.
Yeah. So I had another question. So when we
Okay.
were watching it, you mentioned because there's this moment when they're in this plane, this like crash plane or whatever,
Hmm.
and they're like drunk and high, and they're kind of having a moment. And you're saying that was the midpoint, and I was curious to know more about that and why you felt that was the midpoint. Because I was having a
Well,
hard time seeing
well,
a distinct shift. Because at first I thought, oh, this is going to be the moment when they change tactics. I don't want to spoil the movie for people who haven't seen it, but we are going to. So fair warning. But it was like that was the moment when she was going to decide to go after the stone instead of
right.
going after the sister. But it wasn't. That decision actually came later.
It did come
So
later.
so it didn't seem like anything shifted, but maybe I just missed it. So I was
No,
curious
no,
to
no.
know
So
what you
no, no.
thought.
Actually, the midpoint, I had that on my notes to bring up as well, because what is
Hmm.
happening at the midpoint of the story, and actually
Yeah.
the midpoint, like as far as, and I was talking about the midpoint of the story because I was watching the actual time. I was like,
Yeah. So
this
we knew
is
it was
now,
around
we are
like,
now halfway through this movie and what's happening, and I think this movie is not exactly an example of the typical midpoint structure. The closest event that happened at the midpoint of that story was actually after they got out of the plane. The next thing that happens to them is when they are in that town and looking for the car, and then that guy recognizes her and becomes her friend instead. The drug dealer becomes her friend.
you
So
know
that
what?
was the scene after
Hmm.
basically right after the scene in the plane.
I have a thought actually now that I'm
Okay.
thinking about it. Because something changed. There's something else that I noted that changed in that scene, which was actually pretty important. Was that she up until that point, it was a resistance. There was no sign of attraction on her end to him until that moment when she was drunk and high and she started to relax. And it was like all these walls that she had, you're not the perfect man. When I want to come back to that, by the way, at the end, the idea of what a real man is. She's giving him all this like critiques. And then she kind of loses her inhibition because she's, inebriated and all of a sudden you see that she's being drawn to him, and so it could be seen as the midpoint on her end on a romantic side because that was a moment when her sort of the way she saw him treat or the way she behaved towards him was different. Like she was attracted to him the whole time, but she was hiding it from herself. So that could be what the shift was, because usually there's a lot of different things that can be a midpoint. Almost every time I watch a movie, I've been doing this for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months now. Every time I watch a movie, I try to note what the midpoint is. It's actually there are a lot of differences in what it can be, but there's usually in a movie a major shift in something. Anyway,
Let me go do a couple of Marcos is talking about this. I mean, you guys got to admit
yeah,
to this Heath and Brianna, like instead of going on just this monomyth and trying to fit all stories into it, let's talk about that too, because we even addressed that
yeah,
with Maxwell Alexander Drake. Take Vonnegut's story shapes hypothesis and general plots. Like for me, I don't see the hero's journey with every book. I see plots like the tragedy comedy, the fall
hmm
of man, the flood, Cinderella story, and Alice in Wonderlands. We actually, were you part of that discussion specifically we had with Maxwell Alexander Drake on the subject?
no, I definitely have some thoughts because I
Okay, well,
agree and yet also disagree with this comment because I think it's very much onto something and I
okay,
think you're very keen on something, Marcos.
all right, well then go.
Yeah, so I think yes, in the sense that I'm personally literally as in with the last few days, I've been thinking about this, which was kind of weird timing for me to do this. I've become increasingly skeptical of the idea of the monomyth, um, in the sense that I think that it is a very useful structure that I don't know that it applies to every kind of story. that being said, if you boil it down to its most essential elements, like you get it really simplified, like Heath and I are going through, some of these details. You talk about the ordeal, you're talking about, approaching the innermost cave. Get rid of that kind of stuff. Get just like the bare bones. There's a circle where you start somewhere, something changes, you go through transformation, and you return different. Like that basic version of that story, you probably will see it in all those. I'm looking at some of these ones mentioned: Fall of Man, maybe not the Fall of Man, the Flood, the Cinderella story. Definitely the last two fall into that. So I have to think about it some more. But
He also
but
Marcos
but
also
but
says
but I
also
think you're onto something. I think you're onto something. I think that's why I was saying earlier, I don't want to overemphasize this. I think it is a tool, and if you get too caught up in it, you can kind of miss some of the deeper truths. So I've been, yeah. Oh, Tarantino specifically doesn't follow structure. I was thinking about Memento too. I think is one of the things is it's like it's good to learn this, but then recognize that once you understand this, you could and you can do this professionally. Then it's probably the next stage is to learn into like, okay, what are the other forms of story? It's not that this one is the best way to think about story. It's just that it's popular in the industry right now. Just to be blunt, like it's popular. It's what's expected. Even 50 years ago, it was different. Or maybe 70 years ago.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I would use the word it just happens to be popular now. I think there's probably something deeper to it than that.
Well, both. I think the when I'm saying like when you boil it down to its essential elements, that's the deeper part. And it is, you do find it a lot in myth, but in the sense it's not the only way. It's true that it's not the only way to think about story at all. But it is the most popular way right now to think about story, perhaps, would be my way of thinking about it. So, but I feel like my thoughts on this are somewhat not fully defined. So ask me again in like a month or two or a year or two.
We talked about this on General Geekdom. We haven't done a actual General Geekdom show in many months, but that was the panel show that we were doing over the summer. And Maxwell Alexander Drake, who is the author of this book, was on here, and we were talking about different story structures. And Brianna and I have talked about also on this channel when we talked about there's a video that I clipped out and put on Anakin Skywalker's arc, because we were specifically studying corruption arcs, because she and I want to tell stories of corruption or the fall. So we were talking about this, but we put it to Maxwell Alexander Drake, who just goes by Drake. So we put it to Drake. It was like, and I really liked his answer on this subject. It was like that we were like, are there other stories to be told other than the hero's journey? And his answer was that he thought that if you took Joseph Campbell literally, this idea of the monomyth and everything that is, because he was intentionally taking all these stories and then talking about common elements, that perhaps you could come to the answer that it is the only one, that they are all derivatives of the hero's journey. And he said that in a technical sense, that could be correct, that he could see an argument on a technical level that might be true. That if everything is, if you distill,
if you interpret it loosely enough,
if you distill all possible stories to their common elements, and then you call that the hero's journey, then the hero's journey must be present in all different all the stories that you find. But that if you generalize to that level, if you generalize to that level of generality, then you are in one of those situations where something that explains everything explains nothing. And so it may not be a useful construct for us to generalize the hero's journey to such an extreme. So I like that. I like that distinction, because I am also very big on the idea that, generally speaking, something that describes everything or explains everything doesn't really actually explain it.
Because then it's like, what's the hero's journey? It's just story at that point. If you're saying,
it would be everything.
Then you're just saying this is how you tell a story. So I think that's a good point. And I want to say also, part of the reason why the hero's journey is interesting to us is that I think it's probably the best way to tell an adventure story. That's the thing. I think, like, if you're telling an action movie or an adventure story, it's almost exclusively going to be fit really well into the hero's journey. So that is one thing I can say confidently, is that is a good usage of it. Even though I think Marcos is right that it probably isn't applicable to every kind of story. And I feel like there's a lot more for me to learn as a storyteller before I can give a more intelligent answer on that, because I have a lot more questions than answers on that. But
Yeah.
I'm also skeptical of the monomyth.
So I would say that there probably are not an infinite number. There's probably a small number of canonical types of stories. I don't know what those
Possibly.
are, but something like The Fall, I think should be separated from the hero's journey, because the Fall seems different. So I would say no,
Yeah, maybe.
it's not as well developed. We don't often tell stories. I mean, comparatively, I'm talking about the number of stories. So we don't comparatively tell stories of The Fall as often. But that has a different structure. We've talked about horror having a different structure.
Yeah, although horror
romance
feels kind of like a subcategory, but yeah, and something that I've been thinking about related to this is sort of like a more feminine archetype of a hero's journey, which I suspect is actually different. Not feminine in the sense that all female characters follow this, but
Let's
that
talk about
that there's that there could be a
Okay,
difference.
I've got okay. Hold on. Let me. I've got
So many things to say.
I know. Let me give you a couple of points on Romancing the Stone, but then let's go to
Yeah.
masculine and feminine. Let me check the
Sure.
comments here.
Well,
Go ahead.
well,
What?
oh, whatever. Go ahead. Go ahead. I was thinking there's some other things I want to say about it before we completely wrap up, but that's
About Romancing the
okay.
Stone.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Well, that's fine. So let's do that. But let's hit feminine and make sure we hit feminine, masculine differences.
Sure.
So Mark Hyde says plots as story elements in the storytelling. Plots as story elements are in the telling, though. A lot of stories have cultural relevance because they hit certain beats and journeys. Alice in Wonderland is an example. Let's scroll down a bit. Oh, I'm way behind in the comments.
Oh, lots of engagement.
Yeah.
That's great.
Brainwave Music, good to see you, says Ed Edson teaches at UCLA. He explains the 18 hero goal sequences that fits into 20 or 23 sequences of a screenplay.
See, I think it's telling that there are so many different story gurus out there and they all have their different versions of this is all the beats of a story. And I think that says something about how flexible it actually is. They're probably all right and all wrong, if that makes
Retro
sense.
Nerd Girl says Sherlock Holmes, James Bond, and Indiana Jones are characters that don't experience a character arc in the stories they are in.
Yeah, those would all be considered flat character arcs. So generally speaking, if you have a character that doesn't change, they tend to change the world around them instead.
Well, or the world's opinion of them changes.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. The world's opinion of them changes. Something tends to change.
Lou was big on that. He gave me several examples of that, especially in what's his name? Top Gun actor, our last movie star, Tom Cruise. He said that a lot of Tom Cruise movies are formulated in this way, that Tom Cruise's character doesn't change throughout the movie, but what happens often is that the world's opinion of the character changes.
Yep, that makes sense.
So we both hit on the midpoint, that what was the midpoint of that story. I was going to say that just with other things about Romancing the Stone, the placement of a chase scene at the end of Act 2, this one hit it like, well, we're leaving Act 2, so what's at the end of Act 2? A chase scene. That one, it hit that right. It also had the moment of death for the hero. Joan Wilder, actually even said it when they were supposed to be drowning in that river, and he comes out and we're waiting for her to come up. Like, did she drown? And then he even says something, I thought you were dead. And she even says, I did. So she experiences that moment of death, that change of her character, like Luke Skywalker underneath the water in the Death Star, in the garbage compactor. They even explicitly had her die and be reborn and say the words, yes, I did die. I thought that was interesting. And also the archetype of the shape changer, that you have a character who you misunderstand, and it's often in the context of romance. That was definitely Jack, because he was, is he with her? Is he against her? Is he going to betray her? Is he not? Understanding his motivations, especially from her perspective, difficult. so that also had exactly that kind of thing. So that, I mean, there was a lot in this that it did have that can be used as excellent examples, I think, of telling the hero's story.
And to go to John Truby for a second, I thought that it did some of his things too. I didn't go through, I was going to, and I didn't feel like it, but I was going to go through like all of his stuff that he recommends that you have in a story and see if this one had it. But there were two things that he talks about that that has just really changed the way that I see storytelling and has been really influential on me. And that is about desire versus need. Which I used to think I understood, but I feel like I understand it better now from John Truby, which is basically that, so the desire, of course, is like what the character wants. And when I was watching the movie at first, I thought her need was to have, a real life romance, like the romances that she wrote about. But after I finished watching it, I scratched it out and I went, no, that's her desire. Her actual need, because the need is something that the character is not aware of. And both these things were established at the beginning within the first 10 minutes, which is what you usually want. Like during that ordinary world sequence, you establish who the character is, what their weaknesses are, which is another way of saying what their needs are and what their desire is. What her need was, at least this is what I think it is. I'm curious to know if you agree. But it seemed to me that her need was to kind of understand what real men were like, in the sense that she had this sort of romanticized, perfect idea in her head of this man that was going to sweep her off her feet. And she resisted romance when it came at first, was because this guy was not her idea of a perfect, she calls him not a real man. But I thought that was a really interesting use of words, because he was the real man. He was a real person. He was a human being who was flawed. But even in the end, he was still able to be heroic, and he had a moral choice that he made the right choice, and he made the choice to become like the kind of person that she wants. But at the same time, he was still never a perfect person. He still, wasn't always chivalrous, and it wasn't always, sometimes he was selfish and whatever, because he was a person. He was a real person. And that what she needed was to accept a real person. And so I thought that was kind of like what her character journey was. It wasn't just that he became that. It was both. It was like he grew, he became better, but she was also able to accept him like as he was. At least that's how I read it. So I'm curious to see if you identified with that, or if you think I'm right or not.
That's a really I think that's a really interesting point. That isn't what I would have said, but I think that's a really interesting read into this. That her conceptualization of an ideal romantic partner had to do with her fantasy in the novels that she wrote, and that well, he's not that, because he's actually a real person, but nonetheless he embodied the characteristics that like she needed to learn, and she needed to learn that.
He was still a good guy, just not a perfect fantasy man. Right
now I was going to say something different though, that she's got their interactions with the people on the street. Do you remember that?
With the people on the street.
Yeah, like the guy. Remember when I said, the guy with the monkey puppet? There was actually a puppet that we had, and then she has a similar interaction, like the same interaction with the same people, but she deals with it very differently when she comes back from Colombia. And so I would have said she's very passive, and she's looking for her completion outside of herself.
Oh, that's a really good read too.
This person. Right. So she's looking for in the guise of a romantic partner. And so, but then she realizes that she is a willing hero, but she realizes that she's not actually capable of handling herself on this journey. And so she learns from him this being able to, because she even throws the knife at the end, like her character would have, and gets all of that. Yeah. And so by the time she's been through this, she doesn't have, at the end of her journey, she doesn't have the romantic partner. She doesn't have him because he's gone. But that her interactions with the people on the street are more confident, like, get away from me, like, trying to scam me or something and get me to buy something and get away from this. She even has the line I thought that was really interesting after, she writes this story that really wows her publisher when she comes back. And the publisher says, you're truly a hopeless romantic. And she says, no, I'm a hopeful romantic. And I think that's a change, because the idea of being a hopeless romantic, looking for something outside yourself, trying to do all that, she's changed. She still has the interest in having a romantic partner, but now she's complete in and of herself.
I think you're totally right. I think both. Sorry, are you still?
No, go ahead. But I was going to say, because she achieved that about herself, then in the last 2 minutes, she also gets the reward of having the romantic partner.
Yeah, it's a sweet ending. It has all the things are met, the desire and the need. But one of the things that he talks about is that you can have multiple needs, and especially the best stories have two types. So there's like a personal need and there's a moral need. I don't remember that's the word he describes it, but there's something that they have to kind of learn on a moral or ethical or philosophical level. And then there's like a, just a need that's kind of like a general weakness. And I could see like what you were pointing out is kind of like her general need, like a need that she needs in order to how she needs to grow as a person, to become more confident, to become more complete in herself. But then also there's that it's not exactly a moral need, but kind of that she has this like, she needs to adjust her way of seeing men. And so I think both of those are true. And I'm glad you noticed it. That's cool.
Yeah. So that's great that we will come up with different reads, but I think are both important and probably present in the story.
Yeah. Cool. So, let me see. Was there anything else?
I'll take a look at some comments and then see if there's anything else. And then if not, we'll take a look at masculine and feminine.
Sure.
Trick says, as with gaming, writing storytelling generally requires one to be well understand the basics before manipulating and adding complexity. And that's basically what we're talking about. That, well, can you write a hero's journey story? And can you do that successfully before going on doing something else? James Bacon says there are 8 classic storytelling techniques. The monomyth is the best known.
8 classic storytelling techniques. What are the other 7? I must know.
Brainwave Music says, I like Truby. Have studied much of his work.
I just the other day listened to a podcast episode where he was being interviewed by someone. He was talking about he has a new book, and yesterday I went and requested it at my local bookstore, but it's called The Anatomy of Genres, and it sounds really good because he's getting into the practicality of like writing different genres in the to market. Anyway, it sounded like I need to read it ASAP.
Mute Donkey says that what we're doing for Romancing the Stone was an assignment in college.
Nice.
Speaking of games, everyone in the comments just thinking of another story that doesn't fit the narrative monomyth, the Stanley Parable. Robert says, can you offer a few examples of the hero's refusal? Yeah, sure. For example, Frodo does not want to go. Neo does not want to go. This is much more common. Luke Skywalker, when Obi-Wan Kenobi tells him about that he's got to go with him to save Princess Leia, his first response is a refusal. I can't go. That's so far away from here, blah, blah, blah. And Obi-Wan Kenobi says, that's your uncle talking. So it's much more common when somebody says, why is it important? Because it's much more common. It says, you've got something extremely dangerous to go and do. You have to do something dangerous. You have to do something that's going to disrupt your whole world. The most common response is, no way. No way. So that at least at first, and then the acceptance of the call. Something has to happen because Luke Skywalker is not going to go save Princess Leia. I'll take you to as far as Anchorhead. You can get a transport there to take you to wherever you're going, Mos Eisley or wherever it is that you're going. Right? He's not going to go, but then there's stuff that happens to him that forces him to go, like the stormtroopers show up and kill his aunt and uncle.
I would say it's
come to him.
I would say it's important just because it makes it kind of resonate more on like a deeper psychological level, just because that is, I think, what we do in the real world. Like when something difficult comes to us, usually we resist it. When there's something that's going to change us, that's going to put us outside of our comfort zone, that is the kind of natural human response, usually, most of the time. If you are eager to do it, it's probably not actually a call to adventure. and if you are someone who's willing and does it right away, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not scared or that they don't have an internal resistance or whatever, but it just means that it makes sense for that character in that moment to say like, oh, that's what I have to do.
Yeah, I'm thinking about King Arthur stories too. What's King Arthur in most stories, what's his response when Merlin says, now you have to be king of England? No, I'm just a squire. I can't do that. I'm going to refuse the call to adventure. And then something happens and makes him do it. So most stories like that embody or refuse of the call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we were talking about all of them do, whether they are a willing hero or not. But in most stories, the hero, him or herself, actually refuses the call to begin with.
Yeah. Another quick little side note that I just saw. This is my last one from Romancing the Stone. We were talking about, one of the things that she's learning and growing is, becoming more autonomous and doing things for herself. And I noticed when I was watching it that it was when she started doing that, that the guy, what was his name, Jack, that he actually started to respect her more because they were both kind of annoyed with each other. She shows attraction in the airplane in that moment, but he starts showing it before, and it's the moments like when she crosses the bridge, or when she after that when she starts hacking her way through the jungle, and it's moments like that when he starts to kind of look at her different, and I just thought that was interesting note.
Bilbo is another one. Bilbo in The Hobbit.
Yes.
When the
Bilbo's
dwarves
he's an extremely unwilling hero.
right, yeah. What is Bilbo's response when the dwarves and Gandalf show up and say, "You got to
No.
go on this dragon adventure"? Is like, no, I'm a hobbit. We don't do that. We don't go on adventure. He really has to get a kick in the pants in order to get out the door. So
He's a pretty funny example. Yeah.
Okay, so then in the last 10 minutes, let's say, because we got a little bit, so we got about 10 minutes left
Sure.
for an hour. So what were your thoughts then on masculine and feminine versions of the hero's journey, and how does that differ from having masculine or male or female heroes? Because we've got an example with Romancing the Stone where we have the female hero, but that in your formula here, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a feminine story. She may have followed a masculine story structure,
I
or
don't
could
know
have.
because it is a romance. So everything I'm about to say, I'm going to give with a huge caveat that I don't know. I'm just thinking about this, and I feel like I need a lot more time to think about this and to read other people's thoughts, because there are a lot of other people that have thought about this too. But I have this kind of budding hypothesis,
Okay.
which says something like that. There's kind of two subcategories. It could be that there's two subcategories of the hero's genre, or it could be that there's an alternative that isn't. Did I say the hero's genre? I meant the hero's journey. Or it could be that there's something that isn't the hero's journey at all. Kind of like what was his name, Marcos, that was talking earlier. That this could be something separate. I don't know yet. I don't know the answer. But it would look like it would have to do with how one wins in the end, I think, fundamentally. And so when I say feminine and masculine, I mean like different approaches, different kind of personality traits. I think all men and women both have feminine and masculine things about us. We tend to talk about these different groupings of personality traits just because we all kind of intuitively feel that like most of the there's certain traits that you find most often with women and certain traits that you find most often with men, but we all have all of them. I think that everyone understands that. So an example would be, a very classic example is the hero faces up against a monster at the end and valiantly slays the monster. And some people have pointed out that there's something a bit more masculine about that, in the sense that, I'm a huge fan of having, female warriors and all that. But that doesn't make sense for every character. And that there may be other archetypal ways to deal with saving the day. So my budding hypothesis would be something like this, that if it's a feminine story, one of three things is going to happen at the end instead. So it's not going to be about winning or defeating or being the best or whatever. It's going to be about healing what is broken, beautifying what is ugly, and or taming what is wild. And I say what is because the object that is being healed or tamed or beautified could be a person, it could be a community, it could be a place, it could be another man, it could be a man, it could be another woman. And I have some examples of each of those. So Beauty and the Beast is the most common version of taming what is wild. In this case, it is a man. This is most romance falls into
I was
that.
going to say, no, it's all three of them. What you just
you're
said,
right. It
Beauty and
actually
the
is
Beast
all three.
All three of them.
You're right. It is all three. Another example. So this is interesting. A lot of kind of remakes of fairy tales I find often don't work because they don't understand sort of the underlying psychological truths of the story, and they just kind of randomly change details. But there's a one example that I think actually really works, and that is Maleficent. Maleficent is a completely different story archetypically from Sleeping Beauty, but it's a new story that works very well, and it's actually a story. It's like Beauty and the Beast, except between two women. So it's healing what is beautiful, healing what is broken, and taming what is wild, and all these things. And it's Aurora doing that to Maleficent, and so it's the two archetypes of the feminine happening there, and kind of changing a community. A common example of that would be like Pollyanna. Actually, there's probably endless examples of stories like this. I feel like a lot of fiction written to young girls is like this. I feel like a lot of books I read as a kid were like this, where you have this spunky, independent, kind of countercultural girl who comes into a new community and changes things. Usually a flat character arc, and then a place. I guess I'm not sure if I can actually think of this one that's a place, but I imagine there must be. But anyway, and so it's a non-violent thing, and I think that is what you might say is like a sort of a fundamental feminine drive, is this desire to make things better. I'm coming into the world, I see something that's broken, I see something that's and I'm going to heal it. Something that's ugly, I'm going to make it beautiful. And something. The other example I was going to give is Moana or Moana. I don't know why I said Moana. Moana. If you haven't seen that one, Heath, that's one of the best recent Disney movies to see. That's another one that they got people writing that knew what they were doing. They got a feminine hero's journey. That's like the perfect. It's an adventure story, but it's a feminine adventure story. Not just that it's a female character, but it's specifically a feminine character, where at the end the masculine approach is attempted and it doesn't work, and it's only the feminine approach that works in this situation. And it's like a taming of the wild kind of thing. So that same situation before, you have a monster, a beast, a masculine hero, whether it's a man or a woman, will come and slay the beast. A feminine hero, which I would say again could be a man or a woman, instead befriends the beast, or somehow tames it, and it's no longer a beast at all. And so these are two different approaches that are both inherent to, I think, the human psyche. And so I think both kinds of stories are very powerful and very relevant. So that's my budding theory, or hypothesis, I suppose. I still have a lot to think about it, because I'm still not confident about all those things I just said.
Okay. Well, I think I hope we may need to make this a more regular thing, because I think that what you said here could possibly be 3 discussions. But I want to get I want to clarify.
Yeah, sure.
Clarify this. So, and I think Marco's made a reference to Jordan Peterson in here. So I want to be clear about where you're going with this particular hypothesis right here.
Yeah.
Because you outlined, Beauty and the Beast, healing what is broken, beautifying what is ugly, taming what is wild, is an essentially feminine thing. So according to your structure, is Beauty and the Beast the hero's journey? Because I want to be clear. I'm just wondering, to clarify, are we talking about masculine and feminine versions of the hero's journey, or are we talking about 2 different archetypical stories, the masculine and the feminine?
I'm talking about 2 different archetypical heroes, actually. And so I don't know what the implications are. I don't know if that means 2 different versions of the hero's journey, or if it means 2 different stories. I don't know. I don't. I have questions. I have more than I have answers at the moment. But it's just something I'm thinking about.
Then I think we should explore that further, because it's possible that we could say that the hero's journey is a masculine story. It's possible.
It's possible.
Okay. That doesn't mean that a female can't go on that journey.
Right. It just
means that we have an archetypical masculine story, which is the hero's journey. And then it would be possible that we have we're talking about different stories to be told.
Right.
We could have a different story, which is the archetypical feminine story, which is Beauty and the Beast. And that is kind of a Jordan Peterson kind of thing.
Yeah.
That also doesn't mean that a male can't go on Beauty and Beast's story.
And I think
we should
2
clarify.
important ones have.
Okay.
The Buddha and Jesus Christ. I think those are 2 of the most important male characters that are what I'm calling kind of a feminine journey. especially the Buddha. His is pretty obvious, actually. There's like a literal, he's under the tree, and you have, like projectiles being flown at him. All he does is he touches the ground with his fingers, and he calls upon the earth, Mother Earth, to defend him. And these projectiles are turned into like flowers and stuff. And it's a completely non-violent response. Anyway, I don't know what all the implications are. Or if
Okay.
I'm even right at all in any of my questions. I don't know.
Well, I would have said I'm very interested in telling a Beauty and the Beast story. I want to tell a Beauty and the Beast
Oh,
story.
I have a lot of thoughts on that too. But yeah,
Okay, then I think that can be another subject. I'm gonna make notes here. Let's talk.
because I
Let's just
think
say we'll do
this
Beauty and the
Beauty and the
Beast one
Beast
day.
may just be one permutation of this.
Okay,
That's
okay.
that's my running theory.
It could
That it
be
is,
it could be
yeah.
one permutation, or it could be the most iconic. Because I was not
Mm.
thinking of Beauty and the Beast being a subcategory, let's say, of the hero's journey. I was thinking of it being as something separate. That
Yeah, I don't know.
but we need to explore that further. I think we should explore that further. Now, Maleficent, I've actually got a whole bunch of notes on Maleficent because it did not tell the story that I was expecting it to tell.
It's a new story, and then when you realize that, it's easier to appreciate that it's a different story than the original story. It's not a retelling.
No, it's not a retelling.
Yeah.
I'm gonna I need to watch it again. So Maleficent, I think, is another one that we should talk about because I've got a lot to say about that. I need to rewatch it. When I thought I went into it thinking that it was going to tell the story of the fall. I was
Yeah, but it doesn't.
expecting, but it does not tell the story of the fall.
No.
It does not tell the story of the fall. So Maleficent, I have actually a lot of stuff to talk about, specifically about Sleeping Beauty.
Hmm.
And how I believe that is an iconic and archetypical feminine story, and I think it's missed. I think it's a lot of people will say that it's a very feminists will say it's a very anti-feminine story because of the passivity of Sleeping Beauty, Aurora.
Yeah, it's because they're
And
thinking about it too literally. It's like these are
it,
myths. Like
it,
it's
well,
not a literal person who's literally asleep. Who's
no,
it
well,
represents things. But anyway.
Well, what I had come up with as I watched this. So let's make a note of this to talk about this in more detail. Because what
Sure.
I had come up with is that when I watched that, if you think that Aurora, the princess who goes to sleep, is the main character, then you interpret the story wrong.
Hmm.
She's actually not the main character because you can say
Yeah.
if she's the main character and she's what you're trying to tell a story about, yeah, she just kind of lays there.
She's not a very interesting protagonist, is she?
Right. And so she's one of the Disney princesses, lined up in Aurora, and you're like, well, what does she do? Well, nothing. She just
She
lays
sleeps.
there. But that story actually wasn't about her.
No.
The main characters were others in that story that actually tell, I think, very archetypical feminine stories and about the
Yes.
power of women.
Mhm.
But it screws up if you just analyze it on the most superficial level possible. It's like, oh, Aurora, she just went to sleep
Right.
and then she was kissed and she woke up. So okay, let's talk. So that's a good topic to talk about. Now,
Yeah.
Moana, we talked about that one. Now that one I need to watch again too because we could talk about that one because
I need to
have
study
seen
it.
Moana.
Because it'll I feel like it'll help me a lot with what I'm thinking about.
Well, so I would be very interested because if you said so, that one is definitely the hero's journey.
It is.
That one is the hero's journey. We're not telling Beauty
Yeah.
and the Beast there. We're telling the hero's journey. And in fact, Lou was like, in fact, Lou had me watch that one when we were talking about story structure and stuff like that, because it is almost an exact remake of the original Star Wars, down to the scene. Like when characters enter and stuff like that. So I think it would be very interesting for us to take a look at that one because it's regarded as this quintessential retelling of Star Wars, almost scene for scene. And then, but you're saying that it comes out as a feminine story instead of a masculine.
I have another possible question because, like I'm saying,
Okay.
I don't know what the implications. One of the implications might be is that, like I said, there's a certain type of masculine hero versus a feminine hero, and maybe they can be in any one of these story structures. Maybe you can have a feminine hero or a masculine hero going on the hero's journey.
Well, maybe. In fact, let's take a question right here. I'll let you field this one.
There's a bunch of comments. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to scroll down. But Jason says, I just got here, so sorry if this has been covered. It has not. How would you see the atonement with the father working with a female hero?
I don't know how to answer that yet. I feel like I need to understand that one more deeply, which is partly why I'm reading that book, because I don't feel like that part of the story structure. You should answer, Heath, if you have an answer, because I don't feel like I understand that step of the hero's journey that well. The atonement with the father, and it might be one of those ones that isn't even in every story. But
Mute Donkey says, since the atonement of the father isn't actually meant to be a gendered thing, it can work in the same way. And so that my initial opinion would be something very similar to that. I was going to see if there was Vogler has, let me just see if in the index atonement of the father is in there. So if we could get that, hang on just one second.
Yeah.
RST. I don't see it in the index, but I think that it could still work. I don't think that it's necessarily about a boy's reconciliation with the father necessarily on its spiritual level, but does have something to do with the atonement of the traditions, that sometimes the father is representative of past traditions, that you've got a rebellious youth, and if they were atoning with the father, what they're actually doing is reconciling with past traditions. You need both. You need your past, you need change for the future. But if you reconcile and atone with the father, you're talking about, that's at a much higher kind of level. You're reconciling with past traditions, which is something that could also work with a female embodied hero, I think. So, but that's a good question. I might have to come up with that. Female journey with a female protagonist, Sister Act. Boy, it's been a long time since I've seen Sister Act. I'll have to check out that one. Trick says, Brianna, well said. Interesting take and well worth contemplating further.
Well, that's still a compliment.
Robert says, can it be both? My hero is female, needs to reset nature, but she's a goddess of death and must try to fight her way through first. She actually needs to do both, but I see both paths as necessary.
I absolutely think so. That's one of my questions that I'm curious to think about more is like, can you have one that is a perfect hybridization of both? Can you have a hybrid of a masculine and feminine? And I think if you think about it as a masculine hero versus a feminine hero, as opposed to like different arcs, maybe that helps answer that question. But the idea of the goddess of death, let's table this. I'm going to mention something for future topic about feminine archetypes, because there are two big ones. There's lots of them, but two of the big ones are like there's like the sort of the divine feminine, and then there's the dark feminine. And those two archetypes are contained in Maleficent. So if you're going to, if your kind of positive feminine is going to tame a woman, instead of it being a masculine woman, it's probably going to be a dark feminine woman. But let's put that as another topic. So anyway, goddess of death makes me think of that, because I think you see that archetype throughout mythology. Anyway, I get excited about that stuff.
Yeah, I know. I know that a lot of
it's so deep.
A lot about that
so deep.
Come in. Oh, Gnome says, I just joined late, and if you're working on a story, avoid lust and sexualization of your characters. It will take away from your storyline. Not to say you can't keep it, but it's very easy to get to that point. I don't know. I've got stories where I want sexuality to be a part of it, and I've got other ones where I don't,
I think on the other hand, I would say avoid being a Puritan. There's nothing wrong with sex. Just a matter of, what makes sense for your character and for your story. Is what I would say to that.
Mute Donkey says, by saying the hero's journey is masculine story and whatnot, are we not gendering something that's inherently not inherently gendered?
Masculine doesn't mean male. It doesn't mean male. It's just a collection of personality traits. If we talk about this more, we have to like get in and define that and be really clear on what things we call masculine, what things we call feminine. But yeah.
Mute Donkey, Moana's the hero journey, 100%. I agree. Safa says, have you ever read Persephone Rising by Carol S. Pearson? It's about the archetypical hero's journey from a feminine perspective. I have not.
Well, I'll add that to my list. That sounds really familiar. I actually have a book that I bought yesterday, Persephone Rising,
I didn't
on
remember
this topic, because like I said, there's a whole bunch of people that have thought about this before me. This is what I just saw randomly at the bookstore. I was like, okay, I have to buy this. So this is one example, but there's at least two other books I know of that deal with this. But they always talk about a female heroine and how a woman character should have a different journey. I'm really skeptical of that. It seems to me to make more sense to talk about feminine and masculine versus male and female. But anyway.
Moana literally atones with her father. Her father. So that's. I need to watch that one again. But yeah, her father is the one telling her not to go. So I guess there actually is a literal atonement with the father and reconciliation with the father there in that story. Pilgrim Media, thank you very much for the $2 super chat. Says, is there an ESG component to the WotC statement? So that's going back to what was going on with Kyle Brink. Possibly, but we said we're giving him 48 hours to clarify and see what is up. I do have thoughts on this, and I want to talk about that more. But tomorrow afternoon, if we don't have more information, I'll talk about it. But we will see. So
what does ESG mean? I'm not.
That's ESG is.
I had to ask because I'm not in this community.
ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. So if you're talking about trying to give a company like a score on their ESG rating, like how are you the company doing on social levels or environmental levels or governance and things like that. So Safa says, well worth the read, just the hero's journey, the hero within by the same author, Carol Pearson.
I will add them to my list. Wait a minute, The Hero Within. That might be something that I've already written. No, maybe that wasn't in my list. I think I encountered some of these when I was doing some of my research on Saturday. I went this like crazed, I don't know, multi-hour session where I was just thinking about this and researching it. And I wrote lots and lots and lots of notes. And then, yeah, anyway.
Okay, well, I hope that you will come back and do this more. Yes. I really enjoyed this. I think that we had talked about going over Children of Huron from the perception of, so Brianna said she just started that. I want to read that again. So we want to talk about that. We had talked about horror stories and horror structure to talk about. Now I think Beauty and the Beast and the feminine hero is a topic that we should talk about.
Yes.
Maleficent, I would love to go over. I've got a lot to say about Sleeping Beauty and Maleficent. And then, so I think those are two extra topics that we should go over. So
lots of topics.
Yeah. So
story is my favorite thing to talk about. So anytime, any day.
Well,
not literally, but yes, in theory.
I hope we can make this a regular part of Table Talk, because I think this is, on Tuesdays, if I'm not doing this, I'm playing a video game. This was very much better than playing a video game. I think. All right, Brianna, do you want to tell everybody if you have something that was going on, what you were doing, where to find you and things like that to wrap up here?
Well, you can find me on social media, but I'm never there. So that's probably not worth your time, to be honest. But you can follow me there if you want. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. But I am gearing up a little bit for horror short film to do later this year. I just started doing my shot list, so that's fun. But yeah, things are happening. I'm working on a lot of stuff just like Heath is. So,
all right. Well,
that's all I have to say.
We'll be back here. I mean, this would be a good place to find her. You're welcome anytime. So we'll do these and keep everybody up to date on what you're doing as we're doing these. Yes. Because there are a lot of people over here on this side of stuff with Raven Keep and everything that we're doing, that we're creators, we're making stuff, trying to make things happen. So this is a place for not just talking about things, but actually doing it. All right. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it. I will be live again tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning for the morning grind. So we'll be talking about world building with the Tales of Rabavania. So thank you so much for being here, everybody. I really appreciate it. We'll be back later. Good night, everybody.
Good night.